Landlords must offer persons with disabilities the same terms and rental agreement as offered other tenants. Requiring a tenant with a disability to sign a hold harmless or other liability release agreement that is not required of other tenants violates the law. However, when specifically requested by the applicant, a landlord may modify the standard lease agreement to accommodate a person with a disability. In general, discrimination in the application and screening process appears in three forms. 1. Inappropriate inquiries concerning one's disability status. 2. Refusal to rent to an applicant specifically on the basis of her disability. And 3. Refusal to rent to an individual with a disability on the same terms that are provided to tenants without disabilities. Is a landlord obligated to retrofit a property to accommodate someone in a wheelchair? No. Under the 1988 amendments to the Fair Housing Act, found in the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, a landlord no longer would be obligated to retrofit a property to accommodate a person in a wheelchair or with other physical impairments. However, the landlord is obligated to allow the tenants to make whatever reasonable changes they need to live in the unit comfortably and safely. Those changes would be at the tenant's expense, and the landlord has the right to demand that the unit is restored to the original condition when the tenants vacate. Furthermore, the landlord could reject a proposed change if it were to be deemed unreasonable, even with the tenant agreeing to pay for it. Such a change might be the installation of an elevator or chairlift that would interfere with the use of the facility by other tenants in an apartment location, or a change to a house that would violate current code for setbacks, changes, etc. When the fair housing laws were changed in 1988 to add families and those that are handicapped to the protected classes, there was an unintended consequence. A handicapped prospective tenant wrote a lease on a house, and as a condition of the lease, required the landlord to retrofit the property to accommodate his wheelchair. The landlord refused, and the tenant sued the landlord, claiming discrimination under the 1988 revisions to the federal fair housing laws. After several attempts to settle, the case went to trial, and the landlord lost and owed damages to the tenant. Very soon thereafter, Congress proposed revisions to the Fair Housing Act, which at first were stalled and then made part of the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act. That clearly stated that a landlord would not be obligated to retrofit a property to accommodate a handicapped tenant. Landlords must allow disabled tenants to make reasonable modifications to their living unit or common areas at their expense if needed for them to live comfortably and safely in the unit. 42 U.S.C. Paragraph 3604F 3A. Tenants have the right to modify their living space to the extent necessary to make the space safe and comfortable, as long as the modifications will not make the unit unacceptable to the next tenant, or if the tenants agree and are financially able to undo the modification when they leave. Landlords must allow disabled tenants to make reasonable modifications to their living unit or common areas at their expense if needed for them to live comfortably and safely in the unit. 42 U.S.C. Paragraph 3604F 3A. Tenants have the right to modify their living space to the extent necessary to make the space safe and comfortable, as long as the modifications will not make the unit unacceptable to the next tenant, or if the tenants agree and are financially able to undo the modification when they leave. Examples of modifications undertaken by a disabled tenant include lowering countertops for a tenant who uses a wheelchair, installing special faucets or door handles for persons with limited hand use, modifying kitchen appliances to accommodate a blind tenant, installing a ramp to allow wheelchair access to a raised living room. These modifications must be reasonable and made with prior approval. A landlord is entitled to ask for a description of the proposed modifications, proof that they will be done in a workmanlike manner, and evidence that you, the tenant, are obtaining any necessary building permits. In addition, if you propose to modify the unit in a way that will require restoration when you leave, such as the repositioning of lowered kitchen counters, the landlord may require you to pay into an interest-bearing escrow account the amount estimated for the restoration. The interest will belong to you. There is often debate as to whether or not someone fits into a protected class. For example, ask yourself these questions. Juvenile offenders and sex offenders, by virtue of that status, are not persons with disabilities protected by the Act. Similarly, while the Act does protect persons who are recovering from substance abuse, it does not protect persons who are currently engaging in the illegal use of controlled substances. Additionally, the Act does not protect an individual with a disability whose tenancy would constitute a direct threat to the health or safety of other individuals or result in substantial physical damage to the property of others, unless the threat can be eliminated or significantly reduced by reasonable accommodation. What can I say in a rental advertisement? You can ask that tenants make a certain amount of income, have good credit, and do not have a criminal background. However, you can't say that you prefer a certain group of people in your advertising. This means that you can't say that you prefer applicants who are Chinese or have a job. Be careful about limiting the number of people in the home, i.e., advertising the maximum number of people who can live in the apartment, as that may be discrimination against families with children. See below for more information. It is okay to say no smoking and no pets. Examples of discriminatory statements in advertisement include: I prefer tenants who speak Mandarin. Young professionals only. Not accessible for the disabled. Not ideal for children. I'm only looking to rent to one person or a couple. Proof of 2 years of steady employment required. Students only. I am a Christian and want to rent to someone with similar values. It is against my religion to rent to anyone who is gay. Also, it is a good idea to advertise in many places and ways. If you only advertise in a foreign language, for example, or just in a specific ethnic newspaper or websites, you may be showing an illegal preference for tenants who speak that language or have that ethnicity. The best practice would be to advertise in as many different newspapers as possible to make sure that your rental property is available to everyone to rent. The best thing you can do is to advertise the features of the property itself. Talk about the property's amenities, nearby services, minimum rental qualifications, and the cost to rent the unit in the advertisement. Don't advertise your unit by describing the type of tenant you think would be happy living there, because you may end up saying things that sound like you only want to rent to someone based on a protected special trait. For example, someone who has children. If you do include requirements for the kind of applicant you are looking for, be sure to use criteria that anyone with a protected special trait can meet, such as long-term tenant or tenant with a good credit history. On the other hand, saying that the unit is best for a young working couple with steady jobs could get you in trouble because it sounds like you do not want families with children, which is a protected special trait.